Hello there. Before we start the video, let's know about Upptalk. Upptalk is a live, interactive platform for software training, furnishing robust personalities who could take on universal business platforms. This tutorial video is about Workday reporting. Workday includes a plethora of standard reports that can be customized to meet the needs of the end user. These reports can be exported to Excel for further analysis, or they can be filtered and stored within Workday. The topics we will cover in this videos are building report data source, create custom report, and business object SAR expense report prompts. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and check out other videos related to the latest technologies on our Upptalk channel. This video will be covered by Miss Preeti, who is a certified trainer in Workday reporting, and he will explain to you all of the listed topics.
Okay. So today's session, like you can see at the screen, is all completely focused on how to build advanced reports in Workday. Before we start with the report creation, I'll just give you a brief review of how we are building the report. The report requirement is such that we need to pull all the expense reports for, we will be building a report which will give me all the expense report statuses of the employee. Apart from fetching the expense report statuses of the employee, we'll be also looking at data like whether the employee is active in the system, what is the employee type, what are the legal names, what is the hire date, which location do they belong to, which supervisory organization are they sitting on, what cost center do they sit on. And then we will be fetching details about all the expense reports that they have had on their profile up till now, what's the due date of those expense reports, what's the status of those expense reports, and what is the total amount due on those expense reports. So now, given that this is a requirement for us, we will actually the very first thing that we need to figure out is, like we said in this first session, we will be discussing things from a perspective of reverse engineering. Since we know the fields that we want to pull in the report, now we have to determine which business object these fields are built on. Are we going to get these fields from one business object alone, or we have to use more than one business object in the report? That's the starting point we have to figure out. Once we figure that out, we have to figure out which data source, which is the most optimal data source that is going to give me that particular business object. So now, like I will reiterate again, our report is pulling data like the name of the worker, their employee type, their supervisory organization, their hire date, their cost center, location, etc. And along with that, we are also looking at their expense report details like the due date, the total amount due, and the status of those expense reports. Status by mean whether it's approved, it's declined, it's still in progress, all those kind of statuses. One more thing, the amount that we'll be fetching it has to be in USD, because the organization Global Modern Services is a multinational organization. Of course, each expense report will have its own country-based currency, but we want to only see the USD-based expense report amount. So that's also a very specific requirement that we have. So given that now we know that these are the things we have to fetch, first let's see which particular data source will give me details like whether the employee is active, the hire date, supervisory organization, and cost center. So from what I can see, I'm fetching mix of two kind of data here, right? The employee data as well as expense report data. So now I have to figure out that either my data source has to be something related to expense report, or my data source has to be something related to employee or worker. That's how I have to figure this thing out. So let me just see if there are any first I'm going to see if there are any expense report related data source, and if yes, what does that data source do? Is it gonna help us achieve what we are trying to achieve here? So let me run this data source report. Let's start from where I suggested that we should always first look at if there are any optimal data source. I'm just gonna type expense report over here, or maybe just expense here. to see all the data source related to expense. So can you see there are so many? We have, okay, there are so many expense related data sources. Employer paid costing allocations, no. Employer paid expense costing act, no. I'm not interested in that. Expense items maybe can we give that. Expense payment can be maybe. Expense report lines, maybe this is something I can, yeah, I will be talking about that as well. We are fetching those two fields in the in that. Expense report lines and iterations for worker, expense report lines for company, expense report lines for worker. Maybe these are some data sources that can help me, and expense reports for worker. So these are some data source that can help me fetch the details that we are talking about. Now let me get into this. So if you will see expense items, access expense item as its primary business objects and returns one row per expense item. This data source is not going to work for us because here we are not just looking at expense item, but we are also fetching details of the workers. Basically, the report is going like, first we are fetching the details of the worker, and then we are fetching the expense report for those workers. So this report is primarily focusing on expense items. So I am not going to look at this data source at all. The next is expense payment. If you will see, this is only focusing on expense payment. For me, expense report is something that I am concerned about. Then comes expense report lines and itemizations. If you will look at the description, the expense report happens to be the primary BO, which somewhere looks close to me, but it again says nothing related to the worker. This is basically giving me all the expense reports pertaining to the company, given that it has prompt for company and organization, means the detail can't be split for worker. So I'm just not going to go with this particular. There is something called expense report line, but my requirement here is not to look at expense report line, but only expense report. So maybe this data source is not going to work because this again has a primary BO as expense report line. I'm looking for something which has primary BO as expense report. So this is something which looks somewhere feasible to me, expense report for workers. This gives me expense report as its primary business object. It will also give the workers to which the user has access to, or uh, for the worker as well. If you will see, this particular report has a prompt for the role. Right now, my requirement is not to have a prompt for the role. Basically, I do not want any prompt for the role. I don't want to put if I'm running the report as a manager, or I'm running the report as a financial analyst, or I'm running the report as a cash management security group. I really don't want to do that. So maybe somewhere this particular option gets ruled out for me. Okay, even though this was very close to me, this one thing of having a required prompt for role is something that is putting me off here, and I do not want to go with that. So now next thing that's left for me is to see, okay, if not expense, I can also see if there is a business or data source which is related to the worker, and if worker somewhere has expense report as a related business object. So I have to look for a data source that has worker as the primary BO and check if we can use that data source, and we can pull the details of expense reports as a related business object on that report. Having said that, you can see there are so many worker related data sources. I'm not concerned with 1095C. I'm not concerned with absence related, no union membership. I'm concerned with something called maybe all active and terminated workers. There are also multiple other data sources like all workers for pre-hires. Right now, I'm not pulling the report on pre-hires, so I will not go with that option. One thumb rule always remember is that whenever you're building a report to pull details on worker, either go with all active and terminated workers. If you're pulling report built on contingent workers, you want to fetch details of contingent or contractors in your organization, go with all contingent workers. It's a filtered data source. You really don't have to build a report on all active and terminated workers and go via the route of then adding a filter for contingent workers. This is already filtered data source. So that should be something always be remembered, that a filtered data source is something which will be high performing. If you go and add filters manually on a data source or on a report, of course, Workday has to do its own bit of calculations in the background, which eventually impacts the runtime of the report. So remember how to select. Right now, I'm going to go with the most commonly used option. Uh, yes, there is also all workers data source. The reason I'm going to show you the difference between the two and what each of that does. Yeah. See, both of them are almost similar. For better performance, so access the worker as its primary BO only includes active and terminated workers. For active workers, and this can be done on a effective date. This does not contain any built-in prompts. Now, this one, access the workers as it includes all the workers, even workers hired to be in the future. Now, this is the difference between all active and terminated workers and all workers data source. If you will use all active and terminated workers, it's not going to give you people for whom the hire date is in future. Means if you're running the report as of today and they are going to be hired as of 1st of May, you're not going to get those workers if you use that data source. But if your requirement says that, hey, I do not want to only see the workers who are currently active in the system, but also people who will be hired in the future, yes, you should go with all workers data source. Right now, I don't have such a requirement. I'm only concerned with people who are already sitting. The reason being, expense reports are only generated for people who have been in the organization for a while and they have incurred some kind of expense on the behalf of the organization for some organization related work, right? So I'm not concerned with all future hires and all. That's why I'm not going to. The function is exactly same. The primary BO is exactly same. Security groups almost are also same. There is no data source filter. There is no built-in prompts in these. So that's how you distinguish between the two. Also, there's one more data source called employees related data source, all active employees. Now, one good thing is that if you're not working on the report with contingent workers, if your requirement already says that I do not want to see any contingent workers on this report, you can very safely go and you can build a report on all active employees. But if your report says that, hey, I even want to see contingent workers, then pick up the all active and terminated workers. So there are always, what do you say? There are always pros and cons of each kind of data source. You have to understand what is the specific requirement. You have to ask the right questions to the stakeholder of the report and accordingly build these kind of reports. Right now, I am not going to build a report on all active employees because I will show you how to add filter to filter out all these contingent workers because I want to show you the filter logic. That's why I'm not building the report on that particular data source. I'm only going to build a report on what do we say as all active and terminated workers. Okay, so let me start with the very first thing on this report. The task to create a report is always create custom report. So let me go on to that. You can either mark this task as your favorite if you're a frequent report builder, or you can always search it from your search bar. So this is the task. There is called custom report and custom report transformation. Custom report transformation is basically if you have an existing standard or custom report and you want to tweak it a bit, you can simply use this task. You can pull the name of that standard report. It has to be, of course, a report writer, not an espresso one, because that cannot be copied. So you can pull any of the custom or standard reports and you can just start working on those reports and tweak it the way you want. Right now, I'm just going to create custom report. This is the task I'm concerned about. Let me name the report. It's going to be called as expense report for workers. Now comes the next thing while building a report. What you determine is what kind of report are you building. Since we know that today we are building an advanced report, of course, we are fine. But if you do not know what kind of report you're building, how do you determine? Like I spoke in the first session, you determine it via two ways. First, if your object has to be or your details of the report has to be pulled as rows and columns, then you should obviously go with the advanced. If you have multiple data sources that needs to be combined in one report, build a composite. If you want to look at summarizations and not details in rows and columns, then you should either build a matrix or a trending report. So those are the ways you determine how do you want to look at the report. Right now, this is a very detailed report. I want to look at each worker by worker details of the fields that I just spoke about. So I'm going to click on advanced. Optimize for performance. It's not a temporary report. If I would have built a temporary report, this report will automatically get deleted from the system after a bit. Enable as web service. This is usually used in case of building integrations. The EIBs that integration team uses needs to be XML enabled EIBs so that it can be pulled into the studio. I'm not much aware of that functionality, but yeah, enable as web service only works in those kind of situations. When you want the fields to be defined as XML alias, that's when you enable the report as web service. We are not doing anything of that sort. Optimize for performance. If only you're using an index data source, this particular button is going to work. Unless you don't uncheck this checkbox, you can't see any of the standard data sources here. You will only see index data sources here. My all active and terminated workers happens to be a, what do we say, a standard data source and not an index data source. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to uncheck this checkbox so that I can look for my concerned data source. So this is the one. Workers by active organization. If you want an automatic prompt for organization in your report, this is a data source one should be using because it has a built-in prompt. I don't have any such requirement. I only want to use with all active and terminated workers. So all active and terminated worker is the data source I'm using. Now, if you will see, the data source type itself is demarking it to be a standard. The primary view happens to be worker. Means if there is a field which is available on worker, it can be very easily pulled here automatically. Now, let's start with pulling. So optimized for performance is basically if you're using an index data source, then only that checkbox should be checked. If you do not uncheck that checkbox, it is only going to show you index data sources, which happens to be high performing data sources. Things like workers for HCM reporting, trended workers, those kind of data sources are going to come up. Only if you uncheck that checkbox, you will be able to use a standard data source in the report. I hope that makes sense now. Okay. Now comes the next thing on this is your pulling fields on this particular report. Let me just get rid of this. Yeah, this is much better. So pulling fields on your data sources. Like I said, our requirement is to pull certain details of the worker, things like their worker type, their employee type, their legal name, their hire date, the location in which they sit, their superg and their cost center. Those are the details which we are going to fill. And above and beyond that, we also want expense report related details of these workers. Right now, I'm not going to work on the expense report related details. I'm just going to see if the fields they're asking for on the worker are directly available on worker or do I need to do any calculations. The fields that I've chosen for today are very simple delivered fields because we have not spoken about calculated fields. So I'm not really going to bring any calculated fields in this report. We are only going to deal with Workday delivered fields for today. After we would have understood the logic of calculated fields, for future demos, we can work on that. Okay. So the very first field I'm going to pull is full legal name. I'm going to see, I'm going to just go, so whenever you get a field where people say that, hey, you want to pull the name of the worker, just type name and see if there's a Workday delivered field pertaining to that. And see, so name changed. No, I'm not concerned with the name of the worker has. Name in short display format, no. I do not want only the suffix and prefix. Name without first letter, these all are not something I want. I want a very simple, full legal name of this worker. So I'm just going to see if there is preferred name, first name, legal name is preferred name, all those kind of. So if you can see these particular signs against the fields are denoting what kind of field are they. The T marks that it's a text field. The T and F marks that it's a Boolean field, basically a true and false field. So here we have the preferred name and all. What I'm concerned with is the legal name. So let me add one more word to make the search more specific here. I'm just going to type legal name and see what all fields come up here. Legal name. I am getting a legal name field here. This is not a text field, rather it's a instance field. This particular thing denotes that it's an instance field. If you want to see what this field is going to give me, you should always click on these related actions, the three dots, and look at the description of the field. This particular field gives me the worker's legal name. So that's how, this is what I wanted. So I'm very fine with this field. I'm going to select that. The next field I'm looking at is hire date. Hire date is now primarily very simple field delivered by Workday. There are also a lot of calculations done here. If you can see date E2 hire date UK format. I'm not going into all of that. There are date of hires, and then there is hire date from 2020 till date. These are date differences and all. I want simply the hire date of the worker. I got a field I can see. So let me select it first and see what exactly this does. So simply the worker's most recent hire date. And it cannot be effective dated in the sense that if at all this worker was hired time and again in the organization, maybe they left the organization and they were a rehire, this is only going to give you the most latest recent hire date. If you want to pull what was the person's hire date when they were first hired in the organization, this is not the one you should be using. So this is these are few things we have to keep in mind. What is our exact requirement related to hire date and which particular field is fitting into that bucket. The next field I'm going to pull is employee type. So if you will see, fields are always dependent on the business object that is listed over here. All these fields, if you can see employee type, it's a Workday delivered field, multi-instance. This is the employee type of the employee's primary position. So if the worker has more than two positions in Workday, this is only going to give you the primary position employee type. So that's something you should keep in mind. There are, of course, additional position employee types as well, but that will require you to create calculated fields. I'm just going to simply pull this particular field. If you can see, it's a multi-instance field. You can see this written over here as well. It's not just we can figure it out from this icon. You can also get into the details and look what kind of fields they are. Means a worker can have more than one employee type. They can be a they can be maybe intern or anything else as well. So that's what multi-instance means. That for a worker, the employee type can be more than one value. That's the difference between a single and a full instance. Then what we are going to pull is the location of this worker, the country, location country of the worker. So I'm just going to type location country and see what all delivered fields come up for me. So see, there are multiple location address countries. Location address country for trended workers. This I'm not going to use because I'm not using a trended worker data source. So simply out rule. Location address country region. No, I'm not concerned with the region. Workers for location and country. I do not want to pull the list of workers sitting in a particular location. So of course, I'm not concerned with this. All I'm concerned is, let's look at the description of this field. I just want to pull the country of the worker's location. So I'm just going to click on that button. And this is how you pull that particular field. Now comes the two fields that you're interested in, Superorg and Cost Center. Now, supervisory organizations. So in Workday, I'll just give you a brief overview of this. In Workday, there are different kinds of organizations on which a worker is sitting. Whenever you're hired, you are assigned different kind of organizations, not just in Workday, in a particular organization itself. You get hired into a department, you are assigned a cost center, you're sitting in a particular company, you are assigned to a particular supervisory organization. At times, you're also assigned to a particular division. Completely depends on how the organization is segregating its employees, how they are, I will say, grouping and defining the role of the employees. So in Workday, there are different organization types that you can use. You can assign a supervisory org, which happens to be, what do we say, which lists down your managers who happens to be, supervisory org is basically a cluster of team members reporting under a manager. That's how we define supervisory org. It's nothing but a cluster of subordinates who happen to report to a manager. That is what we call as supervisory org. Cost center is of course used primarily for financial purpose, which payroll you are sitting on, which is your pay group that you qualify for, which particular payroll vendor will process your compensation. All that is determined by your cost center. Cost center is used mostly for financial purposes. HR, of course, is configuring the cost center details and the hierarchy of that, but we do not use that for HR purpose. We many a times, yes, you might define rules like if someone is sitting in this cost center, they should have a compensation grade of so and so, or they should have only these three salary plans assigned to them. Those are the things we use cost center for, but it's used heavily for financials. Your expense reports, your journal lines, and everything is clubbed mostly based on cost centers. That's where cost center comes very handy. Then we have the third location, org type of location. Now, location is basically defined as location hierarchy. First, you might have a region. Basically, you might be North America, South America, Asia. That's how the region is defined. Under that region, then you will have a country in which you're sitting. Maybe under Asia, you are sitting somewhere in Philippines or somewhere in India. Then under the country, you either, if the client wants, you will have a state assigned to you. So suppose if you're sitting in India, it'll mention if you're from Karnataka or you are from maybe Uttar Pradesh, wherever you belong. Under that state comes your very specific location, which happens to the city that you sit in. And if your organization wants, they can even track the locality in that city where you're sitting. So that's how the multiple level of hierarchies are configured for location. So, and then comes the fourth type happens to be the company, which is like the company hierarchy and all those kind of things. So it's primarily the company you're sitting in. So that's where you use these kind of features. So I've also pulled a supervisory org and the cost center for this employee. Now, another requirement for me is that I also want to see the expense report details of this particular worker in this report, right? Now, the data source that we are using in this report has only worker as the primary BO, and there are fields that I cannot pull for the worker of the worker on expense report, like the due date. Of course, I can pull expense report as a field on the worker, and let me show you that. So let me look at for business object as worker, and let me show what are the expense report related fields I can pull off the worker. But there may be fields like due date amount which are not directly available on worker. Maybe those are the fields which are available on expense report business object. In that situation, the only option for me is to see if there is a related business object related to expense report, and that can be brought into this particular report. So right now I'm just opening worker over here as a primary BO. But yeah, you saw, right? How exactly can someone open? Why can I not? Yeah, business object details. So this is where we look at worker related report fields and values. And then I go on the worker BO. I don't know why the system is pretty slow. Okay, as I have already showed you yesterday, how exactly do you figure out if a related business object is sitting on a particular primary BO or not? We can check this because I was just going to show the exact thing to you. We would have gone on worker detail as a business object, and then we would have seen that if expense report is a related business object on that tab or not. But yeah, we already have seen that yesterday, and you can of course, like I said, which hierarchy is a requirement that you're going to get from the stakeholder, right? That which hierarchy do they want to see? And there are fields. You simply type supervisory organization, you will see all the details related to supervisory organization fields. Supervisory org name, supervisory org hierarchy, supervisory organization, and things. You need to read the description of each of those fields, and then you need to figure which is the best field for you to use. Okay, so that's where. So let me just. Yeah, expense report SS. This is sorry, not this one. I guess the other one. This is the one that. Okay, yeah, this is the one we were working on, expense report for work. Yeah. So let me go in the edit mode. Now, maybe Shanti, you can do your own bit of exploration here. You can go and look at worker BO and see how do you figure out the link between expense report and worker and how can you bring it on the report. But since I could not show you that, I'm simply gone because I know that expense report is a related business object on worker. I'm just going to pull that particular BO over here. So what I'm going to type here is expense report. See, I'm getting so many expense report related. So in order to link a business object, a related business object to a primary business object, you cannot just directly pull the business object. There will always be a field that will link your primary and related BO. So these are the set of fields that are linking my primary BO of worker and secondary BO of expense report. There are a lot of fields. I have to see which one will come handy to me. I'm not looking for anyone with warning validations. I'm not looking for expense reports that needs to be purged or the most latest expense reports submitted. I want to look at all the expense reports that were submitted for the employee ever since they have joined the organization, irrespective of whichever status they are in. Right now, my requirement is that. So I'm going to pick up the expense report all status field because that's what this particular requirement is all about. The first details related to expense report that my stakeholder for the report is looking for happens to be the due date. The due date means what is the expiry date of this expense report. If not approved by then, it's going to go in a particular status. So that's the field. So let me see if there's a Workday delivered due date field. So due date, this is the due date field. I get to see that this is built on reporting transaction, and it also says the due date for the reporting transaction. So yes, we have a due date field here. Then comes the next thing that we are looking for is the amount of the expense in USD. Remember, we are not looking for the amount in any currency. We are only specifically looking for the amount of the report in USD. So I have two keywords here to type. First is the amount, and then I have a currency field, amount USD, just to see if there is a Workday delivered field, or I will have to go and build a convert currency field to do that. I see there are two fields related to that. Expense report total amount in USD. Let's read the description. This happens to be now, if you will see, a calculated field convert currency. Someone has already built this field, means there isn't a Workday delivered field in USD. You actually have to do a convert currency. Right now, I'm not going to, yeah, when I open the description, what were you exactly asking? When I open the description, okay. So expense report total amount in USD, then there is operational transaction amount in USD. This is the due date has a different BO. Yeah, just like how worker has different related business objects, even expense report as a BO has different related business objects, right? So if you will, so take it as a homework today. Explore two things: worker and as a BO, and see what all fields go back to the expense report as a related BO. What all fields will let you pull the expense report as a BO and worker related report, and then open expense report as a business object, and then see what are the various related business objects available. Uh, Reporting transaction happens to be one of those business objects. Thus, I'm able to pull fields of that BO on this particular BO. If you have a related business object, and you want to fetch a field of that related business object, you can very well do that. That's why I was able to pull that field on this particular view. So just take it as a homework and explore these two business objects today and see what are the various related business objects they have and which are the fields which are linking them to those related business objects. Okay. Then comes the second field here is total amount in USD for this transaction. I'm not speaking about company here, so I'm hardly concerned about that. The third field that I'm concerned with is the status field. Basically, if the expense report has been approved, cancelled, declined, what status? Let me see if there's a Workday delivered status field built of expense report. I'm not concerned with anything related to budget, so this really doesn't fall. I can see something close to expense report status here. This happens to be a delivered field. It says current status of the expense report, whether it's in draft, progress, cancelled, or approved. Yes, this is what I'm looking for. So I'm just going to pick up this particular one. So this is all about defining your related business objects and the fields related to that. We first looked at how did we pull all the fields of the primary BO. Now we are looking at how are we pulling all the fields related to the what do we call as secondary BO. Now let's look at our filter tab here. Now we will see how can we filter data using a report. So my requirement here is that I do not want to look any contingent workers in this organization, and I am only concerned with just a second. Yeah, I do not want to look with any kind of what do you say? Uh, what was I saying? I myself forgot. Yeah, I'm not looking at any contingent worker details in this report. And the second thing is, I only want to run this report for this particular company called Global Modern Services USA. I'm not concerned with any other company for this particular report. These are the two filter criteria. Whenever the stakeholder says that, hey, I want only a particular subset of a particular population, immediately understand that the report, either you pick up already filtered data source, like had they said that I only want to look at contingent workers, we would have already picked a filtered data source of all contingent workers. But if it's not possible, we can always add filters manually. So right now, my first filter happens to be company should only be global modern services. There's a delivered field. It happens to be again an organization kind of field, and you can just filter this report on that particular company. I'm just going to say in the selection list, you will see if you would have not wanted to run that report for that company, you would have said not in the selection list. If you did not want the company to be empty, you would have selected is not empty. But right now, I just want to run this report for a particular country. So company. So company in the selection list, value specified in the filter, global modern services. That to USA. There are a lot of companies for global modern services spread across, given it's a multinational. I only want the USA one. And the second filter I want to say here is that the worker type should not be contingent workers. I do not want to look at any data for contingent workers. So I'm going to say worker type not in the selection list again. Do not click on all button. This is going to show all the operators irrespective of what kind of field they are. Since worker type happens to be a single instance field, and if you only want to look operators pertaining to single instance field, always use the frequently used button. I do not want to pull contingent workers. That's why I'm saying not in the selection list. Value specified in this filter, of course. Let me see what all kind of workers are here. Yes, I'm not concerned with contractors here. So these are the two filters that I have. Let me click on OK and run this report to show you how the output looks like. And then we'll talk about sorting, sub-sorting, and then prompts. It'll take a while because Global Modern Services has quite some organizations. Quite some employees. So see, there are 1,385 items. The first employee happens to be Logan McLean, and this is how it looks like. There are so many empty rows here. All these fields that you're seeing are pulled off the primary BO, and these are all single instance field in the sense they have only one, each has one value for one worker. A worker is not sitting in multiple countries or for that matter, multiple supers. But if you look at expense reports, Logan McNeil happens to have quite a number of expense reports added to her. That's why if you will see the number of rows here are multiple here. For Logan McNeil, there is more than one expense report, and that's why these duplication of rows, this happens to be empty. If I would have built a report on expense report as a primary BO, we would have seen these rows to be duplicated as well. But since this report is built of work as a primary BO, you will see these as empty instances. So none of them have a due date assigned. That's why that field is coming out to be empty. Uh, Expense report amount in USD. You can see the amount, you can see the status. Most of them are approved, some are as draft, some are as in progress. So this is how you, then we have Steve Morgan, the second employee sitting in Global Modern Services. You can see all the details related to Steve Morgan and also again the total amount due and the statuses. So that's how the report is looking like. Now my next requirement here is that I want to sort certain details on this expense report. I do not want to look at them at any particular instance. I want to see all these expense report amounts in descending order. Means the largest or the highest amount should come at the top and then decreasing accordingly. So basically, I want to sort this report based on the descending order of the expense report amount. So let's see how we can do that. That's a requirement that has been provided, that we want to see the expense report amount from greater to like from high to low. So let me show you that. You will see that there is a sort column in Workday. You can very well use that column to sort the fields uh, in a particular way of the report. So let me show you that. Yes, so this is the sort tab that we have. Now under sort tab, you have few things. Sort by first accessible column. Our first column is full legal name. No, I do not want to do that. There are two kind of sorts, sort and group, and then there is something called as sub-level sort. Sub-level sort is basically if you're using a related business object in your report, we will always leverage a sub-level sort. Any sorting that needs to happen on the primary business object related fields will be coming here. Any sorting that needs to happen on related business object will be coming here. I'm not sorting it on any primary BO field. I'm not sorting it based on the hire date or anything of that sort. Maybe I can show you how to do that as well. So I want the hire date. I want to sort it based on hire date. I want people who have been hired most recently to come up here. So I'll do, sorry, descending here. My main requirement here is that I only want to see the amounts of the expense report in the descending order. So if you will see that immediately when I open the sub-level sort, it asks me for a business object. It's not necessary that you can only sort it based on the BOs you're pulling in the report. You can sort this report based on the fields that are not on the report and even based on the BOs that are not on the report. Requirement, there should be a related BO on worker. Right now, I want to sort it on the BO that I'm using on the report. So I'm going to select business objects on report, expense report all statuses, and I want to sort it based on the amount of that total amount USD field. So let me just click amount USD. Yes, this is the one, and I want it to be descending. So it's saying alphabetical ascending, but I want it to be in descending order. So that is how you define your sorting options. You can, this sort page will let you sort the report based on primary BO fields, and the sub sort will let you sort the report based on a related BO fields. I hope we are clear on this. Okay. So let me click on OK and run the report to show you how exactly the sorting would have happened. Yep. So this is how, if you will see, or since I sorted it based on hire date, the latest one is coming up here and they don't have any expense report related to them. But let me do one more thing. We will look at this from a different perspective as well. So now we have two more criteria that was presented to us to give the prompt to the stakeholder, two prompts. One prompt should be for the worker, and the other prompt should be for what do we say as the expense report amount. Sorry, expense report status. They want to run the report for a specific worker. They haven't said which all workers. Basically, it has to be an open prompt for them. And they also want to run the report for different statuses at different times. So we have to add two prompts for them. The first prompt, which happens to be the worker prompt, is built on the primary business object, right? Worker is a primary BO. So in order to add a prompt in Workday, it has to be always added in the filter tab. You can, until unless it's not an inbuilt prompt, means Workday is already delivering it as a part and parcel of your data source, you have to manually go and build your prompts. So the first step to build a prompt in Workday is to add it via filter tab. So since it's a prompt here, and prompt should always be sequenced first in your filter sequence. If you're having a prompt, you should always put it as first in line of order. That's for performance enhancement, of course. So that's the thing. So if you will see, I'm getting index field as well. I'm not really concerned with index field. I want the simple, what do we say, the standard field for worker prompt. Okay. So this is the worker one, and I'm just gonna say in the selection list because, like I said, always choose the frequently used option. And in the comparison type, I really don't want to hard code a worker here. Since the client has said that I want it as an open prompt, I want to have the flexibility to enter a worker's name every time I'm running the report. I cannot hard code here. I want to prompt the user for value. So prompt the user for value will make it a mandatory prompt. Means you have to enter a value to run this report. Prompt the user for value and ignore the filter condition will made it a soft prompt. Basically, even if you don't enter a value for that prompt, the report is still gonna run. So I want it to be a soft prompt. So I'm just gonna do that. That's how I see the worker prompt over here. And if you will, then once you have added the prompt, you go on the prompt tab, and there are two things you have to do. You have to say, if you'll see, this is coming blank right now. First, this denotes that this report has no inbuilt prompts. In order to populate the prompts from your filter tab, you have to always click on this option, populate undefined prompt default. You will click on this particular tab and you can see immediately it showed you the worker prompt that we had added in a filter tab. If you want to label this prompt and you maybe want to call it employee, you can very well put a label. Default type, no default value, because since I want the user to enter the value, I have left it no default. Had I wanted to specify default value, maybe the user said that, can you give me Logan McNeil as an option? Since I'm always running the report for her most of the time, I would have done that. But they would have been still be able to edit that value while running the report. So it's like basically specify default values when you're running the report for one particular prompt time and again. You know that maybe most of the time this report will be run for Logan and Steve. Then I'm going to specify this default value. But right now they have not mentioned. They just want it to be a completely open prompt for their use. Determine default value at runtime. This is basically if you want this prompt to be mapped to a different field, this is when we use it. Here, we don't have any such option. Maybe later when I'm building a matrix report or something for you, I can show you how do we leverage this, but this has nothing to do. So I'm just going to leave it as a no default value prompt. Now, before I go and run the report, I just want to show you the output tab as well. For advanced report, the only output options are table. You can also build chart and table, but they are not relevant given that you are building this report as rows and columns. Of course, you can always do that, but that's not something. Worklet, I'm not going to talk about it right now. It's a specific different session, so we will talk about that. Help text, maybe you want to describe the report in a particular way and for the user. Maybe you want the user to know few things while running the report. You can add those kind of help text over here. So this is why this particular help text is for. Then comes the share tab. Now this is where you define what all security groups or who all are the users who can run this report. So if you don't want this report to be run by anyone else and just by you, you can use this don't share report definition. If you want everyone who has access to the data source domain, like all activate and terminated data source, you can mention share with all our authorized users. If you want only a specific security group or a specific person to run this report, you can use that. So once you click on all, it will show all the security groups that have access to this data source. So can you see there are multiple security groups that can run a report based on all active and terminated workers. So maybe if your requirement is HR admin, you can select that as well as HR auditor and HR analyst. That's how you share your report. Right now, I'm just going to do share with all authorized users, and that's how you define it. Now comes the advanced tab. Advanced tab is basically these are various other options you can leverage. Optimize for performance. This is already a grayed out checkbox because we are not using an index data source. So this checkbox will not be enabled. Had we been using an index data source, we would have leveraged this option. Then comes freeze first column. Maybe when I'm scrolling left and right on this report, I want the legal name to be constant. I want to see everything. How in an Excel sheet, you freeze your columns and rows, right? This performs the same function. Enable preferred currency. Basically, if someone is is multilingual and is running this report always from maybe China or something, you can enable this feature and they can save which currency they want the output to be shown on. This usually works when you are running this report for journal lines or for that matter for compensation related details. Enable save parameters. So like if you had multiple prompts, one prompt for worker, one prompt for company, and you knew that there is one set of prompt I'll always use. Maybe I will always run this report for Global Modern Services Europe. Then you can save that prompt as a filter over there. So that this is what this does. Exclude execution link from search. This was basically if there's a very private report and you don't want people to search it from the search bar, you can do this. So suppose if someone is typing expense report for worker, if I check this checkbox, it's not going to come in the search tab. Only people who have added this report as a worklet or they have made it as their favorite can look for this. They cannot look for this report from the search bar because I have excluded the execution link from search bar. Okay, so this is what these function does. Enable as web service, like I said, this is mostly used by integrations. And once these API version namespace and all our integration related fields. So that's what each of these tabs mean. Oof. Give me a minute. Yeah, it's restored. So let me click on OK and save this report. Any questions until now, Shanti, on this? I hope you're able to relate back and this is looking useful to you, the information, and you'll be able to leverage it while you're actually building reports. Let me see if my changes were saved or else I will run this report and show you. Yeah, I do have the prompt. So let me run the report and show you. I want to look at the details of only Logan McNeil here. So I'm just going to run this report for her. So see, this prompt is basically an open prompt. I can enter anyone's name. If you will see, since I had sorted the field based on expense report amount to be in descending order, now the highest amount is coming up here and then it's subsequently decreasing. You can similarly ask Workday to sort the field based on the expense report status. Maybe you want it to be alphabetically ascending or so on. So that's how it's done. If you want a prompt for status as well, you can similarly, just like I showed you, you can add it as in the filter tab and you can keep it open and they can maybe run the report for only approved expense reports or the draft ones or the cancelled one. So that's how there are different ways in which you can really build these kind of reports. I want to show you an activity for you here. Yeah. So Shanti, this is what the activity is like. I want you to build a report to fetch all benefit election related details for a worker. So yeah, the thing here is you will have to fetch details like benefit plan, the coverage begin date, the coverage end date, the pay group, and all those. These are the ones that it's all on the recording, so you can see these are the fields I want you to fetch. I want you to add a prompt for benefit plan in this particular report, and I want you to filter this report based on supervisory organization of human resources. So these are the requirements. Filter this report for supervisory or human resources, and add a prompt for benefit plan on this particular report. See how you want to go about building this report, whether you want to build it on a worker data source or you want to build it on a benefit plan or benefit election related data source. Just see what looks comfortable for you, and then you can approach the report. Rest said, we are done with today's session. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.